Chapter 24. Dawn broke over the Eastland and the forests of the Anar, and the journey of the three who had come from Shady Vale resumed. Supplied with fresh provisions by the healers of Storlock, they rode east out of the village into the woodlands beyond. Few saw them depart, a handful of white-robed stores, sad-faced and voiceless, gathered at the stables behind the centre to lift their arms in farewell. Within minutes, the three had disappeared into the tree, gone as silently and as enigmatically as they had come. It was the kind of autumn day fond memories conjure up of a mild season's passing when winter snows lie deep about. It was warm and sun-filled with the colours of the forest trees, radiant and sprinkled with soft beams of light, and the morning smells sweet and pleasant. Dark and chill as the days gone by had been in the wake of the passing of the late year's storm. This day was light and comforting, with its dazzling blue skies and sunshine. The promise of the day was lost, however, to Brin Rone, haunted by Allanon's dark revelation and by a tense expectation of what lay ahead. Neither could share much of the warmth that day had to offer, separate and withdrawn, each within a dark covering of private emotions and secretive thoughts. Vale Girl and Highlander rode forward in determined silence through the dappled shadows of the great dark trees, feeling only the cold that lay buried within themselves. Our path hereafter will be a treacherous one, Allanon had told them, as they gathered that morning before the stables, where their horses had been tended. His voice low and strangely gentle. All across the Eastland and through the forests of the Anar, the wraiths will be watching for us. They know that we come. Paranor removed all question of that. They know as well that they must stop us before we reach the Maelmord. Gnomes will seek us, and where they do not, others who obey the walkers will. No path east into the Ravenshorn will be safe for us. His hands had come up, then to rest upon their shoulders, drawing them close. Still, we are but three, and not so easily found. The wraiths in their no minds will look two ways for our approach. North, above the Rab River, and south, out of Culhaven. Safe and unobstructed, but for themselves. These are the approaches a wise man would choose. We will choose neither. Therefore, instead, we will pass where it is more dangerous, not only to us, but to them as well. We will pass directly east into the central Anar, through the Wolf's Gate, Darkland Reach, and Olden Moor. Older magics than theirs dwell within those regions, magics that they will be hesitant to challenge. The Wolf's Gate are forbidden to the gnomes, and they will not enter, even though the wraiths command it. There are things that are more dangerous than the gnomes we seek to avoid, but most lie dormant. If we are quick and cautious, we should pass through unharmed. Darkland Reach and the Moor are the haunts of other magics yet, but there perhaps we shall find some more friendly to our cause than to theirs. They rode through the western fringe of their central Anar, up into the high ground that formed the doorstep to the rugged forest humps of the Wolf's Gate. As they travelled, they searched past sunlight and warmth, and the brilliant autumn colours for the dark things that lay ahead. By midday, they had reached the passageway and begun a long, circuitous climb along its southern slope, where trees and shrub hid them from view as they walked their horses in the deep shadow. Mid-afternoon found them well past the pass, winding their way upward toward the high peaks. Timber and rock stretched dark and silent about them as the daylight began to wane. By nightfall they were deep within the mountains. In the trees through which they passed, the shadows slipped now like living things. All the while they searched, yet found no sign of other life and felt themselves to be alone. It was curious and somehow frightening that they could be so alone. Brent thought as the dust settled into the mountains and the day came to an end, she should sense at least a touch of life, other than their own. Yet it was as if these peaks and forests had been stripped. There were no birds within these trees, no insects, no living creature of any kind. There was only the silence, deep and pervasive. The silence itself become a living thing in the absence of all other life. Allanon brought them to a halt in the shelter of a grove of rough and splintering hickory to set their camp. When provisions were sorted, the horses tended and the camp at ready, the Druid called them to him, ordered that no fire be lighted, and stalked off into the trees with a quick word of farewell. Belgal and Highlander stared after him wordlessly until he was out of sight, then sat down to consume a cold meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. They ate in darkness, not speaking, watching the shadows about them for the life that never seemed to come. Overhead the night sky brightened with a great scattering of stars. "Where do you think he has gone this night?" Brin Rone wondered after a time. He spoke almost as if he were asking himself the question. Brin shook her head and said nothing. The Highlander glanced away again. "Just like a shadow, isn't he? Shifts with every change of sun and moon, appears and then he's gone again. Always for reasons all his own. He wouldn't share those reasons with us, of course. Not with mere humans like us." He sighed and set aside his plate. "Except that I guess we're not mere humans anymore. Are we?" Brin toyed with the bit of bread and cheese that remained on her own plate. "No," she answered softly. "Well, no matter. We are who we always were, nevertheless." He paused, as if wondering how sure of that he really was. Then he leaned forward. "It's odd, but I don't feel the same way about him now than I did before. I've been thinking about it all day. I still don't trust him entirely. I can't. He knows too much that I don't. But I don't mistrust him either. He is trying to help, I think, in the best way that he can." He stopped waiting for Brin to agree with him, but the Vale girl stayed silent, eyes turned away. "Brin, what's troubling you?" he asked finally. She looked at him and shook her head. "I'm not sure. Is it what he told us last night? That we wouldn't see him again after this?" "That, yes, but it's more than that." He hesitated. "Maybe you're just... Something is wrong." She cut him short, and her eyes locked on it. "What?" "Something is wrong," she said slowly, carefully. "With him, with you, with this whole journey, but most especially with me." Rone stared at her. "I don't understand." "No, I don't understand either. I just feel it." She pulled her cloak tightly about her, hunching down within its folds. "I've felt it for days, ever since the shade of Bremen appeared in the Hagelshorn, and we destroyed that wraith. I felt something bad coming, something terrible. And I don't know what it is. I feel too that I'm being watched. All the time I'm being watched, but there is never anything there. I feel worst of all that I'm being pulled away from myself, from you and Allanon. Everything is changing for what it was when we started out at Shady Valley. It's all different, somehow." The Highlander didn't say anything for a moment. "I suppose it's because of what's happened to us, Brin. The Hagelshorn, Paranor, Allanon telling us what the Shade of Bremen told to him. It had to change us. And we've been away from the Vale and the Highlands for many days now, from everything familiar and comfortable. There has to be a part of it too." "Away from here," she said quietly. "And your parents." "But Year most of all," she insisted, as if searching for a reason for this. Then she shook her head. "No, it's not that. It's something else. Something besides what's happened with Allanon and missing home and family, and that's too easy, Rone. I can feel it deep down within me. Something that..." She trailed off, her dark eyes uncertain. She looked away. I wish I had Yer here with me now, just for a few moments. I think he would know what was wrong. We're so close that way. She caught herself, then laughed softly. Isn't that silly? Wishing for something like that, when it would probably mean nothing. I miss him too, the Highlander tried for a quick smile. At least he might take our minds off our own problems. He'd be out tracking more wraiths or something. He stopped, realizing what he had said, then shrugged away his discomfort. Anyway, there's probably nothing wrong. Not really. If there was, Allanon would sense it, wouldn't he? And after all, he seems to sense everything else. Brin was a long time responding. I wonder if that is still so, she said finally. I wonder if he still can. They were silent then, neither looking back at the other as they stared fixedly into the dark and pondered their separate thoughts. As the minutes slipped away and the stillness of the mountain night seemed to press in about them, anxious to wrap them in the blankets of its stark, empty solitude, it seems more certain with the passing of each moment that some sound must break the spell. The distant cry of a living creature, the small shifting of forest wood or mountain rock, or the rustle of leaf or insect's buzz. But nothing did. There was only the quiet. I feel as if we are drifting, Brin said suddenly. Rone shook his head. We travel a fixed course, Brin. There is no drifting in that. She looked over at him. I wish I had listened to you and had never come. The Highlander stared at her in shock. The beautiful dusky face stayed turned toward his own. In the girl's black eyes there was a mix of weariness and doubt that bordered too closely on fear. For just an instant he had the unpleasant sensation that the girl who sat across from him was not Brin Rone. I will protect you, he said softly, urgently. I promise. She smiled then, a faint, uneven smile that flickered and was gone. Gently her hands reached out to touch his own. I believe that, she whispered in reply. But somewhere deep inside she found herself wondering if he really could. It was nearly midnight when Allanon returned to the campsite, stepping from the trees as silently as any shadow that moved within the wolfskag. Moonlight slipped through the boughs overhead in thin streamers of silver and cast the whole of the night in eerie brightness. Wrapped within their blankets, Rone and Brin lay sleeping. Across the broad forested sweep of the mountains all was still. It was as if he alone kept watch. The druid paused several dozen feet from where his charges slept. He had walked to be alone, to think and to ponder the certainty of what was to be. How unexpected the words of Bremen had been when the shade had spoken them. How strangely unexpected. They should not have been, of course. He had known what must be from the beginning, yet there was always the feeling that somehow it might be changed. He was a druid and all things were possible. The black eyes shifted across the mountain range. The yesterdays of his life were far away, the struggles he had weathered and the roads he had walked down to reach this moment. The tomorrows seemed distant too, but that was an illusion. He knew the tomorrows were right before him. So much had been accomplished, he mused, but not enough. He turned and looked down at the sleeping Vale girl. She was the one whom upon everything would depend. She would not believe that, of course, or the truth about the power of the Wishsong, for she chose to see the elven magic in human terms, and the magic had never been human. He had shown her what it could be, just a glimpse of the limits of which could be taken, for she could stand no more. He sensed. She was a child in her understanding of the magic, and her coming of age would be more difficult. More difficult, he knew, because he could not help her. His long arms wrapped tightly within the black robe. Could he not help her? There it was again. He smiled darkly. That decision that he should never reveal all, only so much as he felt necessary, that decision that it has been for sheer Onward in a time long past. Truth was best learned by the one who would use it. He could tell her, of course. Or at least He could try to tell her. Her father would have said that he should tell her, for Will Omsford had believed the same about the elven girl Amberley. But the decision was not Will Omsford to make. It was his own. It was always his own. A touch of bitterness twisted his mouth. Gone were the counsels at Paranor, when many voices and many minds had joined in finding solutions to the problems of mankind. The Druids, the wise men of old, were no more. The histories in Paranor and all the hopes and dreams that had once inspired were lost, and only he remained. All of the problems of mankind were now his, as they always had been in his, and would continue to be his for as long as he lived. That decision, too, had been his to make. He had made it when he had been chosen to be what he was, but he was the last. Would there be another to make the same decision when he was gone? Alone, uncertain, he stood at the edge of the forest shadows and looked down at Brin Rone. They rode east again at daybreak. It was another brilliant, sun-filled autumn day, warm, sweet, and alive with dreams of what could be. As night fled westward from the Wishsong, the sun lifted out to the eastern horizon, slipping from the forest line in golden streamers that stretched and spread to the darkest corners of the land, and chased the gloom before them. Even within the vast and empty solitude of the forbidden mountains, there was a feeling of comfort and peace. Brin thought of home, how beautiful the vale would be on a day such as this. She thought to herself as she walked her horse along the ridgeline and felt the sun's warmth upon her face. Even here the colours of the season spread in riotous disarray against the backdrop of moss and ground cover still green with summer's touch. Smells of life filled her nostrils and left her hurdy with their mix. In the vale the villagers would be awake now, about to begin their day's work. Breakfast would be underway, the succulent aroma of the foods that were cooking escaping through windows thrown wide to catch the warmth of the day. Later, when the morning chores were done, the village families would gather for stories and games on an afternoon that too seldom came this time of year, anxious to take advantage of its ease and recapture for at least a brief time the memory of the summer gone. I wish I were there to share it, she thought. I wish I were home. The morning slipped quickly away, its passing lost in the warmth of the sun, and the memories and dreams, ridgelines and mountain slopes came and went. And ahead, the deep forests of the lowlands beyond the Wishsong began to appear in brief glimpses through the humped peaks. By noon, the bulk of the range was behind them, and they were starting down. It was shortly thereafter that they became aware of the Chard Rush. It began as sound long before it could be seen, a deep, penetrating roar from beyond a wooded ridge that broke high and rugged against the sweep of the eastern sky. Like an invisible wave it surged toward them, a low and sullen rumble that shook the rutted earth with the force of its passing. Then the wind seemed to catch in it, magnifying its intensity until the forest air was filled with thunder. The way forward levelled off, and the timber began to thicken. Topped the ridgehead, freezing spray and a deep, rolling mist masked all but the faintest trace of distant blue from a noonday sky, now lost far above the tangled branches of the forest trees with their damp, moss-grown bark and earth-coloured leaves, shimmering bright with wetness. Ahead the trail sloped downward, upward once more, through clusters of rock and fallen timber that loomed spectrally out of the haze like frozen giants. And still there was only the sound, massive and deafening. Yet slowly as the trail wound on, and the ridgeline grew close, the mist began to dissipate beneath the thrust of the wind, as it raked down across the summit of the land out of the Wishsong to the lowlands east. The bowl of the valley opened before them, its wooded slopes dark and forbidding in the shadow of the mountain peaks, beneath a line of ridges coloured gold with sunlight. And here at last the source of the sound was discovered. A waterfall, an awesome towering column of churning white water poured wildly through a break in the cliff rock and tumbled downward hundreds of feet through clouds of mist and spray that hung thick across the whole of the western end of the valley, downward into a great river that twisted and turned through rocks and trees until it was lost from view. In a line, the three riders drew their mounts to a halt. "The Chard Rush," Allanon pointed to the fall. Brin gazed down wordlessly. It was as if she stood at the edge of the world. She could not describe what she felt at that moment, only what she saw. Below, barely 100 yards distant, the waters of the Chard Rush crashed and swirled down rock and through crevice in a magnificent, breathtaking spectacle that left her filled with wonder. Far beyond the valley into which the waters fell, the distant eastland spread to the horizon, shimmering slightly through the wind-blown spray of the fall, coloured like a painting faded and worn with age, its clarity muted. A steady mist washed over the Vale girl's dusky face and whipped her long black hair and forest-like clothing like a light rain. She blinked the water from her eyes and breathed deeply in cold, hard air. In a way she could not explain, she felt as if she had been born again. Then Allanon was motioning them ahead, and the three riders began working their way down the inside slope of the wooded valley, angling toward the break in the cliff face where the falls dropped away. Single file, they wound through brush and slanted pine that clung tenaciously to the rock soil of these upper reaches, following what appeared to be a worn, rutted pathway that ran down past the falls. Rising clouds of mist enveloped them, damp and clinging against their skin. The wind died behind the rim of the ridgeline, the sound of its shrill whistle lost in the muffled roar of the fall. Sunlight dropped away into shadow, a false twilight settling over the forestland through which they passed in gradually deepening waves. Finally they reached the base of the falls and continued along the dark pathway that had brought them there to emerge at last from mist and shadow into warm sunlight. They rode eastward, fresh beneath the scattering of pine and yellow-leaved oak. Gradually the roar of the falls subsided, and the air grew less chill. In the trees about them, birds flew in sudden bursts of colour. Life had come back again to the land. Brin sighed gratefully, thinking how relieved she was to be clear of the mountains. And then abruptly Allanon reined his horse to a stop, almost as if the druid had willed that it should be so. The forest about them went still, a deep layered silence that hung over everything like a shroud. Their horses came to a halt behind us. Vale girl and Highlander stared at the big man, and then at each other, surprise and weariness in their eyes. Allanon did not move. He simply sat there astride his horse, rigid against the light, staring ahead into the shadows of the forest trees, and listening. "Allanon, what?" Brin started to ask, but the druid's hand lifted sharply to cut her short. At last he turned, and the lean, dark face had drawn tight and hard. A look within the narrow eyes that neither Vale girl nor Highlander had ever seen. In that instant, without understanding what it was that the feeling had come over her, Brin was finally and suddenly terrified. The druid did not speak. Instead he smiled, a quick, sad smile, and turned away. His hand beckoned them after, and he started ahead into the trees. They rode only a short distance through a scattering of trees and dying shrub to where a small glen opened before them, beside the banks of the river. There Allanon drew his mount to a halt, and this time dismounted. Rone and Brin followed him down. Together they stood there before the horses, looking out over the glen into a deepening stand of trees beyond. "What's wrong, Allanon?" Brin finished the question this time. The druid did not turn. "Something comes. Listen." They waited, motionless beside him, so complete was the silence now that even the sound of their own breathing was harsh within their ears. Brin's premonition whispered anew in her mind. Come from the rain and the grey of the dragon's teeth to find her. Fear stroked her skin, and its chill touch, and she shivered. Suddenly there was a sound, faint and cautious, a soft rustling of dry leaves as something moved among them. "There!" Rone cried, his hand pointing. Something came into view through the trees on the far side of the glen. Still hidden within the gloom, it suddenly stopped, catching sight of the three who watched it. For long moments it stayed frozen within its shelter, invisible eyes staring out at them, a silent shadow within the dark. Then with swift and certain intent, it stepped from the trees into the light. The chill that had settled within Brin turned instantly to frost. She had never seen anything like the creature that stood before them now. It was a man-shaped in appearance, raised upright and half-crouched, his long arms dangling loosely before it. It was a big, strong creature, lean and heavily muscled. Its skin was strange reddish colour, drawn tight against its powerful body. It was hairless except for a thick ruff that grew about its loins. Great hooked claws curled from its fingers and toes. Its face lifted toward them, and it was the face of some grotesque beast, blunt and scarred, gleaming yellow eyes fixed upon their own, and its snout split wide in a hideous grin to reveal a mass of crooked teeth. "What is it?" Bronley whispered in horror. "What was promised," Allanon replied softly, his voice strangely distracted. The reddish thing came forward a few steps, further to the edge of the glen. There it stopped and waited. Allanon turned to the Vale girl and the Highlander. "It is a Yakra, a thing of another age, a thing of great evil. It was locked from the lands by the magic of the creatures of Fairy in a time before the dawn of man, in a time even farther back than that in which the elves created the forbidding. Only magic of equal power could have set it free again." He straightened and brought his black robes close about him. "It appears that I was wrong. The Maelmord wraiths did anticipate that we might come this way. Only within a place like these mountains, in a place where the magic still lives, could a thing like Yakra be set loose again. The wraiths have given us an adversary far more dangerous than they to overcome." "Suppose we find out how dangerous," Rone suggested bravely, and drew forth the ebony blade of the sword of Lee. "No," Allanon caught his arm quickly. "This battle is mine." The Highlander glanced at Brin for support. It seems to me that any battle to be fought on this journey must be fought by all of us." But Allanon shook his head. "Not this time, Prince of Lee. You have shown your courage and your devotion to this girl. I no longer question either. But the power of this creature is beyond you. I must face it alone." "Allanon, don't," Brin cried suddenly, grasping his arm. He looked down at her then, the worn face and the eyes that penetrated part all that she would hide, a mask of sad determination. They stared at each other, and then without quite knowing why she did so, she released him. "Don't," she replied softly. Allanon reached to touch her cheek. The far side of the glen, the Yakra gave a sudden sharp cry that shattered the silence of the afternoon. A cry that was almost like a laugh. "Let me come with you," Rone Lee insisted again, starting forward. The druid blocked his way. "Stand fast, Prince of Lee. Wait until you are called." The black eyes fixed those of the Highlander. "Do not interfere in this, no matter what happens. Stay clear. Give me your promise." Rone hesitated. "Allanon, I cannot." "Give me your promise." The Highlander stood before him, defiantly for an instant longer, and then reluctantly nodded. "I promise." The druid's eyes turned back to the Vale girl one last time, a lost and distant look in the gaze they gave to her. Keep you safe, Brin Rone," he whispered. Then he wheeled about and started down into the glen.